First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
The Jewish Holy Week of Passover began at sundown on Monday, April 22nd. The celebration of freedom continues 8 days through the evening of Tuesday, April 30th. The first 2 days and the last 2 days are full-fledged holidays, and the middle 4 days are semi-festive. The first 2 days commemorate the 10th of the 10 plagues of Egypt. In that final plague, the mystery beyond naming killed all the firstborn of Egypt, but passed over the Israelites, hence Passover. At this, Pharaoh released the Israelites from bondage. They immediately fled. They took their dough before it was leavened. They did not wait for the bread to rise. Pharaoh changed his mind and went chasing after them. A week later came the episode of the parting of the Red Sea, commemorated the last 2 days of Passover. This is not history. Scholars put the setting at about 1300 BCE, but historically, it never happened. But that is not the point, because it's not about ancient Israelites. It's about you and us. It's about freedom, yours and ours, right here and now. It's a narrative metaphor for us, as it has been to people through millennia. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Celebrate and reflect on this blessing of freedom. In parts of the world, full-scale slavery is still going on. If you're here today or listening online, then chances are that you are not enslaved in that full-scale way and never have been. Even so, I would guess that there has been a metaphorical land of Egypt in your past in which you were bound and from which now you are free. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. And yet freedom is ever the half-won blessing. Modern pharaohs live unchallenged. Chains still there are to break, metal or subtle made. Resentments, large or small, bind us. A further exodus awaits us still. And further truth, bright as a burning bush, cries to become known. We who are not under an unrelenting grind of oppression, nor consumed wholly with mere survival, stand somewhere in the middle, between full-scale slavery and full-scale liberation. We have broken out of some fetters, but other fetters, or perhaps reconstituted versions of the old ones, have clamped onto us. The next step in the work of freedom lies before us. So bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Did you hear about the guy who was addicted to brake fluid? He said he could stop anytime he wanted. Well, we all have our addictions. Whether it's full-blown alcoholism or drug addiction or something we think of as milder, the key feature of addiction is that disconnect between what we want ourselves to do and what we're able to actually do. Passover is a time for celebrating the blessings of our freedom and also reflecting on what greater liberation would be. Pharaoh takes many forms of bondage, addictions to video games or shopping or work. We can be addicted to anger or to blaming judgment. What Pharaoh holds you in bondage in Egypt? Freedom is ever the half-won blessing. Its unfinished work lies before us. As they say in the recovery community, you can be consumed by your addiction or you can be recovering, but never recovered. It is rare indeed for a human to attain complete freedom. New chains appear, old chains return, and their constraints are often so comfortable for a while. It's no easy thing to commit to a path of freedom, of liberation. Here are 4 questions. 1, can you make a decisive break with a big part of your past? 2, can you endure the sacrifices this will mean? 3, what about the effects this would have on others? 4, are there others who can go with you on this journey, who can walk with you on a path of liberation? The Passover story is a narrative for wrestling with each of those questions. As I said, it's about you. First, can you make the decisive break? This is the not waiting for the bread to rise part. Even under the worst of conditions, there is some leavening in the loaf. What? Give that up? Our addictions and our judgmentalism offer us creature comforts that are like a nice, hot, yeasty loaf. What harm could it do to let one more batch of dough rise? Is it really necessary for the sake of freedom that we make do with the blandest, unsalted crackers? Sometimes, yes, it is. At some point, we have to say, no more delays, no more putting it off. And that's going to mean something that was in the pipeline has to be abandoned. The bread won't have a chance to rise. Is that a reason to stay in bondage? It's those little rationalizations that keep us stuck, isn't it? Can you make the decisive break? Second question, can you endure the sacrifices? Unleavened bread is nothing compared to hardships and trials on the path of freedom. It's scary out there. The status quo has fierce armies to enforce its way. Days after leaving Egypt, the Israelites see Pharaoh's army advancing on them. They cry out to Moses, Exodus chapter 14, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Powerful resources are arrayed against you to enforce the old way. And you don't have the resources you need to support a new way. A few weeks after leaving Egypt, the people moan again to Moses. Exodus chapter 16. "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." The path to freedom is risky and uncertain. Can you endure the sacrifices? Third question, what about the effects this will have on others? Are you just being selfish, thinking about your own freedom? In the Passover story, the Israelite quest for freedom involves an enormous slaughter of Egyptians. The rituals, the paschal lamb, the unleavened bread, the consecration of the firstborn, probably, scholars think, predate the story. And the story probably took shape around pre-existing rituals. The rituals account for the story more than the story accounts for the rituals. It's impossible to know, writes the scholar Carol Myers, how much the narrative draws upon authentic experience and how much of it developed over time in relation to existing customs. Whatever its source, here we have this rather problematic story. Myers continued, the intentional destruction of innocent life in God's slaying of the firstborn has long troubled readers of this narrative. What kind of deity was it whose deed could benefit one group at such expense of others? Already in the early post-biblical period, rabbinic commentators sought ways to rationalize such a horrific act. The Israelites' path to freedom came at the cost of this tragic slaughter of Egyptian firstborns. Is it worth it? What is the cost to others of your freedom? Should the Israelites feel responsible for this tragedy to the Egyptians? It's true that liberation leads to compassion. The chains that hold you back more than anything limit your ability to be present and caring to others. But might it not be better to try to work with the chains you've got, dragging them with you, though they hamper and slow you? Put yourself in the Israelites' position. You hear that a plague is coming, and to protect yourself, you put lamb's blood on your doorway. Should you also be protecting your neighbors? Pharaoh got the same warning you did. In fact, he got 9 previous warnings in the form of the first 9 plagues. Water was turned to blood, there was a plague of frogs, then one of lice, then flies, then livestock pestilence, a plague of boils, of hail, of locusts, and of darkness. He got the warnings, but he hardened his heart. Actually, Exodus says repeatedly that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So is it Pharaoh's fault? Let's say you did tell your Egyptian neighbors to put lamb's blood on their doorway and they just wouldn't do it. Now they've lost their child and their grief is overwhelming. There was not a house without someone dead, Exodus says. What kind of God would do that? What kind of world would do that? What kind of world is it where there can be such enormous grief? It is more than you or I can fix. Your path to freedom occurs in the context of others' pain and loss, but your freedom is not the cause of their loss. Perhaps the Israelites' hearts went out to their neighbors. Maybe they asked, "How can we help?" And they were told to just leave, which happened to be what they'd always wanted. If there is a path of liberation for you, going back to school, quitting your job, changing the way you eat, changing your daily routine to include journaling, study, and meditation, and you hesitate because of the effect this might have on the people around you, you might just ask them. They might tell you, as the Egyptians told the Hebrews, just go, do it. What about the effects your liberation would have on others? A story about an activist I will call Gloria illustrates one way this question can play out. I met Gloria a number of years back in the aughts. Gloria worked for good, for policy changes that would increase fairness and reduce suffering. Gloria had anger that took her straight to blaming and condemnation. Those people in that other party are evil, corrupt, willfully blind, she said. Some of that party's supporters are simply dupes who are duped by the evil and corrupt others. Her anger and judgmentalism were her bondage. It was hard for her to give that up, to be free of those chains, because she saw them as integral to helping the people she wanted to help. So there's that question. How would your liberation affect those you care about? Sometimes we stay in the chains because we think we need them to be of service. Gloria was venting to me one day, and I remembered it's often the case that anger outward is a projection of anger inward, that negative self-judgments manifest as negative other judgments. As the saying goes, when I point the finger at someone else, there are 3 pointing back at me. Those people have no respect for other people, she said. So I asked, have there been times when you didn't respect others as much as you wish you had? And yes, there had indeed been times. Personal stories of regret and shame began pouring out. We'd made the shift from other blame to self-blame, a step maybe, but not a final destination. The path ahead to self-forgiveness and self-compassion, and thence to compassionate understanding of others, including one's political opponents, would not be easy. The liberating path would make Gloria a more effective activist, and certainly one who enjoys life more. She assumed she needed her chains of anger and judgment to serve the causes she cares about. The truth is that freeing ourselves allows us to more lovingly and more effectively care about others. Fourth question. Are there others who can go with you on this journey, who can walk with you on the path of liberation? Here, too, there is a lesson in the Passover story. Not one Hebrew ever walked out of Egypt alone, nor could any have survived in the wilderness alone. Freedom is a collective enterprise. We need each other to be free. Yes, there is necessary work that only you can do. You individually have to decide it can't wait any longer, can't wait for whatever batch of dough you're in the middle of to rise. You individually must choose the uncomfortable path. Once you do, though, you don't have to face it alone. There is other necessary work only we can do together. That's what a liberal faith community is for. Liberal as in liberty, as in freedom. Liberal faith community offers support, maybe some guidance, maybe some insight, maybe some affirmation and encouragement as we wander in the wilderness trying together to make our way to the freedom that is our birthright. You aren't responsible for everything. Sometimes you have to let go and let others manage on their own, but we are responsible for care and connection to one another. Walking a labyrinth might be a way you can bodily enact and reflect upon your path to and of freedom. Some years ago, I was asked to lead a labyrinth walk for about 50 people in rehab to recover from substance abuse. These were people wrestling with demons that I can only imagine. Somehow, summoning courage that they wouldn't have known they had, they made a break with their past lives. A sudden and dramatic exit from the comforts of slavery to their addiction. And they now faced the slow part, the rest of their lives, really, the wilderness to traverse, a new life of freedom to build. We gathered by the outdoor labyrinth. And a labyrinth is not a maze. It has only one path. Its lesson is let go of your need to control, trust the path, keep going, one foot in front of the other. You must go into your center, wind your way in. You must find what is there, and you can't stay there. You must return out to the world, bringing the true self you have found. As the Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This was a group that knew a lot about what will destroy them. Freedom is our half-won blessing. The first half is straightforward and negative in a good way. No slavery, no masters, no overlords, no chains. The second half is paradoxical. We arrive at liberation by accepting the constraints of a discipline. By surrendering, by letting go and giving up, we gain. The first half involves being able to do what you want. But then you become enslaved to your own impulsive wants. So the second half involves liberating the true self from the bondage of the desiring self. The labyrinth is an exercise in freeing the true self by accepting the dictates of a prescribed path. When you walk a labyrinth, you wind around and end up at the center, and then take the path in reverse and go back out. Both journeys, the in and the out, are circuitous and terribly inefficient. The labyrinth's lesson is that the path and the destination are intertwined. They define each other. The destination isn't the destination unless it's reached by the needful path. Like Hebrews in the wilderness, you go around and around, often winding further out from your destination rather than closer. I instructed the group to notice the rhythm of their breathing and synchronize their steps with their breaths. It helps the mind quiet so that the path can take over. And then I stood by the entrance with my watch, and I sent them in one at a time at 5-second intervals. The first ones in reached the center, hung out there a while, and started back while others were still heading in. And this too is a lesson. We encounter people who are heading in an opposite direction from us, who we could bump heads with, who might seem to be heading in a wrong direction, but there is only one path. We go in and we go out, and if you're in a going out phase and pass by someone in a going in phase, rest assured your positions will soon be reversed. Practice the gentle grace of letting others go by. And notice that doing this, you may have to take a step off your path to let them by. Others can knock you off, but never very far, and you can step back on again. Afterwards, the group and I retreated to an indoor space to debrief about the experience, and I heard from them how they valued it, how they took to its lessons, though some acknowledged they had been skeptical and dubious. Some spoke of how, yes, their need to control had to be tamed, and how good that felt. They spoke of how the path was not always clear. A layer of leaves had gotten thick, but they let themselves trust the person in front of them. And how good it felt to trust and follow, to not be alone on this path. We all have our addictions, and we're sometimes judgmental of others or of ourselves. Before us is a path of freedom from those constraints. It may take some discerning to see it. Once you do, take it. Go. You are not alone. There are others on the path waiting for you to join them. Go. Don't wait for the bread to rise. Amen.